Welding. Welding is necessary to the infrastructure of the nation, as many parts of our everyday life are forged into this topic. So now let's begin by heading to the classroom. Let's review what we'll be discussing today. First, we will begin by prepping you to go into the lab. Then, we will discuss the procedures of welding. And finally, we will weld. So now let's begin by heading to the classroom to learn the material necessary for welding. Now you may think that welding class is the last place you want to be, but I assure you without it, many parts of your everyday life would be very different, such as buildings, planes, cars, and other medical equipment, and many parts of our everyday life are welded together. Now we will discuss the polarity we must run. The most common polarity run for steel is DCEP, which stands for direct current electrode positive. This means we will be putting our negative terminal, our ground into the negative terminal, and our electrode into the positive terminal. Now this is not always the case, for if we want to TIG aluminum, we must run AC, or alternating current. We will now discuss the three main processes of welding. Stick, MIG, and TIG. MIG stands for metal inert gas welding, which is because the gas that was used when it was created was an inert gas, which means it was non-reactive. But this is not the case today, as the gas we use is indeed reactive. Now we move on to TIG, which stands for tungsten inert gas welding. This is because of the tungsten electrode that we use, because of the very high melting point of this, keeps our weld free of contaminants. Then we move on to stick, which has got its name because of the shape of the electrode often resembles a stick. And ironically enough, many people's first time welding with this, they tend to stick this rod to their base metal. As we enter the lab, we first begin by putting on our safety glasses, as they are an important part required for our safety and protection. The safety equipment recommended is long pants and boots, as well as you're probably going to want to wear a cotton shirt, as it will not stick to your skin when it burns, as I'm sure that polyester shirt you're wearing will. Then you are going to need a welding jacket, to put on your safety glasses, some welding gloves, and lastly a welding helmet. This can depend, because depending on what you're welding, you can be welding a toxic material, which you will need extra safety equipment such as a respirator, etc. So now, as we enter the lab, we first begin by then we will head over to our machine and set it for the material we will be welding. Today we will be welding steel in DCEP and MIG welding. So we first begin by putting our ground into the negative terminal, then we stick our electrode into the positive terminal, and then we run this wire from our wire feeding machine into our welder so that they may run in sync. Then we set it to the correct voltage and the wire speed depending on what we are welding. Now we head over to the C25 mixture of gas right beside our bottle. This is 25% argon and 75% argon and 25% carbon dioxide. We then hold our weld gun and pull the trigger so that we can help set our gas to the correct PSI, which would be 35 PSI for this process. And now you grab your welpers and trim off that excess wire, and now your welder is all prepped. We then grab our grinder and head over to the vise to clamp our piece in and get it prepped up, to get it clean to help prevent porosity or so-called holes in our weld. So once we do that, we then grab our welpers, since this piece will be hot from the grinding, and move it over to our table to where we can heat it up with our acetylene torch. This will help the metal flow more evenly throughout our weld, as it opens up the grain structures within the weld. This also helps to create weak spots within our weld from when that intense heat of the welder first hits that metal piece. So now we bring it back to our table and we get ready to weld. As we switch into our welding helmet, we get ready. So you want to set your shade to whatever shade you prefer, as this is mostly a preference. And then I personally prefer to go in a zigzag motion when I'm welding. This is also a preference, as there's many other ways to do it that will work just as well. So now you want to get it in a slow and controlled motion, ensuring even flow throughout our weld. Now, you're going to hold your gun when you're done welding over the weld to help ensure better gas coverage as it cools down, to help prevent porosity or holes in your weld. When you're welding, that nice even flow is going to help you to prevent undercut on your weld, which weakens your base connection between the metal and the base steel. You're also going to want to go in the slow controlled motion to help avoid huge big dips in your weld or chunks, as big crowns are not admirable either. And finally, now that you know what a good weld is like, as we wrap up this topic, I hope you now understand the principles of welding. There is much more that we could have covered, but this is simply the basics and all we have time for. So as we first began by prepping you to go into the lab. Then we showed you the procedures to welding. And finally, we welded. I'm done. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Hey, I made time.